Hello my sweet friends, and welcome to my channel where I share kinda shabby but always chic creative inspiration. My name is Becky and I thank you so much for joining me today for episode 2 of the Sundress Sew Along. In today's video we are going to be sewing this lovely dress, and it is McCalls 8258. It is a reproduction of a vintage 1970s pattern. It features a beautiful square neckline, a gathered upper bodice as well as a gathered lower skirt, and a midriff panel with ties. There are no buttons or zippers. It is just an easy pull-on dress and just such a beautiful silhouette. I love this dress. And now I hope you are excited to sew your own beautiful version of this dress. So let's get this project started. Before I begin sewing a garment, there's two things that I always do. I use tracing paper that I pick up from Amazon, and I trace out all of my pattern pieces. That is going to keep my original in pristine condition, and I can use it for years to come. And the second thing that I do is make a very rough sample of the bodice, because that is going to reveal any alterations that I'm going to have to make before I actually start cutting into my pretty fabric. You do not need to make a sample. You do not need to trace your patterns. These are just my personal preferences. When you begin cutting out your patterns, I am making view C. And you will choose either one of these layouts depending on if your fabric is 45 inches wide, which mine was, or 60 inches wide, and you will know that when you purchase your fabric. And you'll also notice some of your pattern pieces are plain, some of them have dots on them. This section right here is your glossary that's going to define what each of those pictures mean to assist you in properly laying out your pattern pieces. And it also tells us pattern piece number 11 will also need to be cut from some interfacing, and I just use a lightweight fusible interfacing. And to save time in the video, I have already applied my interfacing to the backs of pattern piece number 11. And because there are a lot of pieces in this particular dress, I used blue painter's tape and I numbered each one of those pieces so I wouldn't get them confused as I was putting my dress together. And some of those pieces we've had to cut out twice because they are going to be used as a facing, or they're going to be the lining for those pieces. And I label them with an F after the number so I know those are my facing pieces and don't get them confused with the other pieces of the same number. Before removing the pins from your pattern pieces after you've cut them out, you want to transfer any markings on there that's going to help you in the assembly of your garment. So anywhere where there are these notches, I just take my scissors and make just a small, shallow snip, just like that. And then anywhere where there's small or large circles, I use the Dritz double-faced wax-free tracing paper, and it is a chalky finish, and it comes in multiple colors, and I used the red so it would stand out against my blue fabric. I lay it on my table, place my fabric over that, place that over the fabric, and gently go over those areas. You want to make sure that you're transferring the color, but you don't want to make a hole in your pattern piece. And you can see that it transfers that onto those pattern pieces just like that. And I always keep a rag handy because that chalk wants to get everywhere. And then I'm going to wipe it up off my table as well. To begin with, you're going to need piece 1, your 2 pieces of piece 2, because you actually cut 4 of these, and you're going to need piece 3. Match those notches and those circles. I'm going to place face down and pin or clip that into place. And these edges here are not going to match up. They're going to kind of overhang. Fold this back, matching notches, and those circles together. And again, pin or clip that into place as well. And then you've got piece number 3, and you want to take that longer edge, and you're going to match up those double notches and also those small circles there. And again, some of that fabric is going to be hanging over and not matched up with anything else. Then you'll take this other edge of piece number 3, face down on piece number 2, again matching up those notches and all of those circles that you drew onto your fabric. And you are going to pin those same pieces in the same way for your facings as well. And we're going to begin stitching just like we normally do at the edge and stitch down, but instead of going all the way to the end, we will be stopping our stitches at the small circle. And on each one of these seams, we will stop the stitching and backstitch at these small circles. And we're stitching a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way down our shoulder bands right until we get to that small circle. Then when you get to the circle, backstitch a few stitches and come forward to stop in the center of the circle. So it'll look like that. And with this end left open, when we turn it, that is going to create a nice angle on our shoulder seams. So go ahead and stitch your remaining seams on each of your shoulder bands, remembering to stop at the small circle. Then you're going to press each one of those lines of stitching. And after pressing all of those seams, you're going to trim that seam allowance down. And I am using pinking shears for this, but you can use your regular fabric shears if you do not have the pinking shears. Then after trimming, you're going to go back and press all of those seams open. Then we're going to take those shoulder band pieces right sides together. And after matching up all of those raw edges and pinning them into place, I then went back with a heat erasable fabric pen and I made a small dot where our dots previously were, where we had stopped that stitching. I removed the back platform from my sewing machine to reveal the free arm, making it easier for me to sew a continuous seam around our shoulder band. And we're once again stitching a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And as I'm stitching, I want to make sure that both of those seam allowances are still open. Then once I get to that circle, lift up, pivot the fabric, and you're going to continue stitching the inner section of your shoulder band, making sure that you pivot at those circles. Press all of those lines of stitching flat first. Then you'll trim these seams down just like you did when you joined the shoulder band together. You'll do that all the way around your shoulder band. And before turning, I like to use a lint roller to get up all those excess threads and fibers. Then turn right side out. Kind of roll those seams with your fingers to get them nice and flat. And press those. And then we're going to machine baste the lower raw edges together, and I do put a couple of pins in there just so it doesn't move on me while I'm sewing. And we're also going to take care of pieces 4, 5, and 6 while we're there at the machine too. So take both of pattern piece number 5, right sides facing out. So one of them is going to be the lining inside your dress, and one will be the outside band of your dress. Match up your notches and get that pinned together too. Then we are going to be doing gathering stitches along both edges of piece number 4, and then we'll be doing gathering stitches just along the top, which has those notches there, of piece number 6. And our basting stitch is a long stitch, so I have set my stitch length to 5, and we don't need to back stitch because this is just a temporary stitch, and I'm using the outside of my presser foot as a guide while I am stitching. And we're going to pivot. So continue to stitch all the way around the outer edge of your shoulder band. And now we're going to stitch around the outer edge of our midriff piece. Again, using our presser foot as a guide to keep our stitches straight. And just continue stitching all the way around the outer edge. And with our basted pieces finished, we are now going to do the machine gathered stitches on piece number 4 and piece number 6. Make sure to increase your stitch length to the longest possible. Also make sure you have long thread tails. We are not going to back stitch. My first row of stitching is going to be at the 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we're just going to stitch all the way down. And you can see as I begin stitching, it already wants to gather that fabric up. So just stitch from end to end at 1/2 inch seam allowance. And when you reach the end, make sure that you pull out at least another 6 to 8 inches of thread tails for that gathering stitch, and trim that. And then pull those threads longer. Position your fabric back underneath your presser foot, and this time I am going to be stitching a 3/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to do that same process down both sides of piece number 4 and along the top edge of piece number 6. Then after sewing all of your gathering stitches, remember to set your sewing machine back to your standard stitch length. Then press those basting stitches. And now we need to gather our upper front and our lower front until it is the same width and can be attached to the midriff piece. Then this part of our upper front will be attached to the shoulder band. So I'm going to tie off the threads on the left side of each of these pieces here so they don't come out when we're starting to make those gathers. Then after tying it off, you can come to the opposite side and grab those top threads and just slowly begin pulling and adjusting those gathers all down the length of your piece number 4, your upper front bodice piece. And then you'll do the same thing to the bottom and also the top of piece number 6. I'm going to take the midriff piece and lay it on piece number 6, the lower front, and match up those double notches and pin that. And I can evenly distribute those gathers. Take those other double notches and match those up and pin into place. Then those edges are going to line up and I can get all of that pinned into place, making sure all of the ruffles are evenly gathered across that pattern piece. Then I tie off the threads on the other end of that gathered line. And I like to use lots of pins to make sure it's not going to move on me when I sew it down. And we are going to be stitching a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So hold threads for a few stitches, back stitch to secure those stitches, and then just continue stitching as you normally would with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Making sure to remove your pins. You don't want to sew over those. And I do use my fingers to kind of hold those gathers down so I can see better as I am stitching. Then when you come to the other side, back stitch to secure those stitches into place. Normally I would have just pinned all of this together and sewn it all at one time, but I didn't want to confuse you if you are a beginner. And then you see your lowest line of gathering stitches is visible, so you're just going to take your seam ripper and very carefully lift out that thread and remove that gathering stitch. And then once you have a few of those threads out, flip it at one end, and then you just pull that thread right out and remove that excess gathering thread from the back. And now we're going to press this seam up toward the midriff portion. And now we're going to attach piece number 4 to the top of our midriff section. Now the section with the dots is the top piece that is going to go to the shoulder band. So you're going to take this piece and lie it face down with those single notches matching up to the notches on your midriff section. So pin that side down and then adjust the gathers across the top until it evenly matches the other side. And you can see it just matches up perfectly with our midriff piece. We're again using that 5/8 inch seam allowance, coming forward and then back stitching to secure the stitches. Making sure to remove pins as we come to them, and then use your fingers to hold those gathers so you can see your line of stitching. And then back stitching when you get to the other end. Come here and remove that visible line of gathering stitches. And then we're going to press that seam down toward the midriff piece. Now we're going to take this edge here and attach it to our shoulder band. The side that has the double notches is what is going to match up to the double notches along our upper front. So I'll match those double notches here and pin that and adjust the gathers until those pieces fit together. Again, we have all of those edges aligned. That looks great. And because I have already shown you how to sew this and this line, I will be stitching this off camera just to save time in the video. So you will make sure that you're going to back stitch at each end to secure the stitches, and this is also stitched with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. After stitching, I removed the visible gathering stitches and then pressed that seam allowance up toward the front band. Then you'll take piece number 7 with the notches at the top and place that back band and match up those notches and pin that into place. And because this is just a simple seam, I will be doing this off camera, again to save time in the video, but just go to your machine and stitch a 5/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at each end to secure your stitches in place. And then you'll press that seam up toward the band. And after pressing, I went back and trimmed that seam down with my pinking shears. And because I'm not doing sleeves, I'm now on step number 12, which is our side facing piece number 11. I have already applied my interfacing, so now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to finish off these bottom edges with a zigzag stitch. I do not like my zigzag stitches to fall off the edge because it tends to just pull and bunch the fabric. So I'm going to use the outside of my presser foot as a guide and just stitch down that bottom edge. So it looks like that after stitching, and then I'll finish off the edge of my other piece as well. Then after stitching, remember to set your machine back to your standard straight stitch. And now I'm just going to trim this down close to, but not through, my zigzag stitching. So it looks like that after trimming that down. And because my fabric really wants to fray quite a bit, I went ahead and did a zigzag stitch on my front bodice pieces and trimmed those down as well. And now grab your two side panels, and that's pattern piece number 10. And with right sides together at the top, match up these notches and pin or clip those into place. And you also have notches on the side that you want to match up as well. And we're stitching a 5/8 inch seam allowance just along the top edge here on both of our side panel pieces. And remember to do back stitches when you start and end your stitching. Then we're going to press our stitching. Then I'm going to trim just a small portion with my pinking shears. You don't want it too close to your line of stitching. Then press that seam up toward your facing piece. Now we're going to understitch, which means we are going to be stitching that seam allowance down to the facing, so when we turn it under at the armhole, it's not going to roll out on us when we wear it. And I am using the inside of my presser foot right along the edge of that seam to keep my stitches straight. And keep your hand underneath, making sure that that seam allowance stays towards your facing. So it's going to look like that after stitching, and that seam allowance has been stitched down to the facing. Turn your facing in and press so it lies flat, and then go to your machine and do some long basting stitches down each side here, just to hold that facing in place when we go to attach our panels to our dress. Then get your last two pieces, which is piece number 9, and those are your belt pieces, and you will iron those in half, right sides together, all the way down on both pieces. To save time in the video, I'm going to be stitching my ties off camera, but you are going to go to your machine and you'll start stitching and make sure you've got some back stitches there. Pivot at your corner and stitch all the way down your tie piece, all the way across here, ending with some back stitches there. And I've put pins in an X-shaped position to remind me I am not stitching across the notched edge, because that needs to stay open for us to turn our ties right side out. Press your stitching and then trim down your seams and come to your open end and turn that right side out. And then use something with a blunt end and send it through your tie, and then gently poke out those corners. Use just the tip of your iron to go right down that seam. Then roll and work that seam flat and give that a good press. So that seam is going to look nice and flat after pressing. Then on the curved edge of your side panel, take your tie with the seam side facing down, and you're going to match that dot, also the notch here and here on your tie. And then after pinning that into place, go to your machine and do a basting stitch just to hold that tie in place so it doesn't move on us when we are putting the rest of our dress together. And now we're going to insert our side panels, and I think showing it with the practice garment will make it a little easier for you to understand what we're doing. But you can see when I turn this practice garment to the side, that side panel is literally sewn in between the front bodice and the back panel, just like this. So with my front bodice right side facing up, and we want the curved portion there where our tie is facing down, and where this top bodice piece meets the shoulder band, there's notches there. You've got notches right on that side panel, and you'll match those up. Then as you come down that side to your midriff piece, you have notches there, but you also have notches right where that tie is basted on, and you're going to match those up as well. Then you'll ease the gathered bust portion with that rounded portion of the side panel, just slightly stretching that bodice portion. And after all those areas are nicely matched up, then you'll just continue matching up all those raw edges and pinning into place all the way down the side of the dress. Then you'll bring the back piece around, and you have notches on your side panel and notches on your back panel, and you'll match those up. Then you'll just continue matching up those raw edges and pinning those again all the way down the side of the dress. And I pinned that other side panel in the same way. And once again, we've got a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and that side facing starts up here. So I am going to back stitch up to the top of that facing and then come down and finish stitching my side seam allowance. Hold threads, back stitch to the top of that facing, and then come forward. And I wanted to pin and stitch on this side so that way I could make sure all of these seams are going to stay facing in the right direction as I sew my side seam down. And you'll stitch all the way down your side seam just like this, with your 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then as you come to the end of that seam, make sure to take a couple of back stitches to secure those threads into place. And then just sew all of your remaining seams just like you did this one. After stitching, I pressed those seams open, and we are going to come back and take care of these raw edges in just a moment. But first we are going to finish off the edges of the armhole. And I did one side already just so what we're going to do will make a little more sense to you, but that's what it's going to look like on the outside, and we're going to use bias tape to finish off the inside. I'm using 1/2 inch single fold bias tape. I've already measured the armhole so I know how long I need this to be. Slightly iron and open out one of those edges, but you're still going to be able to see where that crease was. Your instructions do tell you to start 1.25 inches from the top of this edge, so I've made a mark there with one of my heat erasable fabric pins. Then I measured out 5/8 of an inch and marked out and measured little dots all the way around the armhole, but I did that on the outside. So we start with our dress inside out, fold up that edge, because when we sew it, it's going to be a nice, clean, neat edge. We're placing that crease right along those 5/8 inch dots that we've made, and we're going to place this where we made the 1.5 inch mark down from our facing, and we're going to pin that into place. And you're going to do that all the way around, placing that crease on each of those dots until you come to the other facing side. So it gets pinned in from side to side just like this, And we're going to stitch our 5/8 inch seam allowance right down the crease that we aligned to all of those 5/8 inch dots that we made from our raw edge here. And so just take your time, make sure that everything remains lying nice and flat as you're stitching, and stitching down to the next pin. And you're going to do that all the way around your bias binding. As you're coming down to the other edge, make a couple of back stitches and come forward to secure all of those stitches in place. I'm going to snip right under that facing. So this seam allowance is going to be separate from our side seam. You are going to trim down this seam allowance to be even with that edge of your bias tape. So that is going to be even. Very carefully trim all the way around, and I've made that snip there on the other side, and I'm just going to finish by trimming this off right here. Then I'm going to turn the dress right side out and press that bias tape away from the seam. Then turn it inside out again and roll that bias tape to the inside and press. And we're going to also add a couple of pins in here as we go along. Once you have everything neatly pressed and your pins in there, then you're going to take needle and thread, and then you're going to slip stitch all around this outer edge to secure that into place. And you can see how I did that right there. Then turn right side out and press again. And that looks fantastic. And now we're going to come back and finish off our inside seams as well. And this technique is going to be a faux French seam. So we are going to take each side, roll it to the inside of the seam, take the other side and roll that in and put a couple of pins in it, and it is going to look like that. And now I am going to go off camera and stitch all of these down very close to that folded edge. You do not have to do this particular seam finish. You can use pinking shears, or you can use a zigzag stitch or a serger if you have one. But I chose this particular technique because I found this fabric to have excessive amounts of fraying. And that gives such a professional looking finish, and it's going to prevent those seams from ever fraying. And now all we have left to do is hem the raw edge at the bottom. So go try your dress on and see where you would like that hem to fall. I've pressed up 1.5 inches all the way around, and the back of the dress is just slightly longer than the front. And then I folded the raw edge under by 1/2 inch, so that is going to leave me a 1-inch hem right here. And then I'm just going to take needle and thread and do a hand-stitched hem, just like when I hand-stitched that bias binding. And you do not have to do a hand-stitched hem. You could definitely machine stitch this, but I think a hand-stitched hem is going to look very nice on this dress. Because I'm short, I do prefer a knee-length hem. And look how cute this dress is paired with a cardigan and my vintage blue velvet shoes. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been my pleasure to sew with you. And until next time, my sweet friends, be blessed.